The HR summons arrived on a Wednesday morning. A calendar invite. 30 minutes. No agenda listed. Just my name, my manager's name, and two initials I didn't recognize, which I later learned belonged to the senior employee relations investigator. I had been at that company for 4 years. 4 years of early mornings, clean work, and results that spoke for themselves. 4 years of being the person everyone came to when something needed to actually get done. And in 30 minutes, I was going to sit across from HR and defend myself against accusations I hadn't even read yet. I closed my laptop. I took a breath. And I thought, okay, let's see what they have. 3 of my coworkers had gone to HR together. A coordinated report. 6 separate complaints, ranging from hostile communication to creating a toxic environment to my personal favorite, undermining team morale. None of it happened. What had happened is that I had been quietly outperforming all 3 of them for 2 years, and they had noticed. Stay with me, because what I uncovered during the investigation, what I documented, and what ultimately happened to each of them is a story about what happens when you come for someone who keeps receipts. Let me tell you about the team. There were 6 of us in the department. I'll call my 3 accusers by the names I used in my personal notes at the time: Donna, Patrick, and Sienna. They had been there longer than me, which in certain workplace cultures translates into a kind of territorial authority that has nothing to do with output and everything to do with tenure. Donna was the informal ringleader. 12 years at the company, deeply embedded in the social fabric, and I say this with the flatness of someone who has since confirmed it with data, consistently the lowest performer on measurable metrics in our department. She was also the person our previous manager had relied on as a cultural barometer, which meant her opinion carried weight that her results didn't justify. Patrick deferred to Donna in almost everything. Sienna was newer than both of them, but had aligned herself quickly, the way people do when they sense where the social gravity lives. I had never had a significant conflict with any of them. I was polite. I was professional. I kept to myself more than I socialized, which I now understand was interpreted as arrogance rather than focus. My first full-year performance review came back in the top 10% of the department. Donna's, I learned later through a source I trust, did not. That was the beginning of the problem. I just didn't know it yet. I didn't know I was being targeted until I was already sitting in the HR room. But afterward, once I knew what I was looking for, I could trace it back 7 months. It started with small things. Emails I'd sent to the team being forwarded to my manager with selective context removed. A complaint to our department head that I had taken over. A presentation that was supposedly Donna's. A presentation I had been explicitly asked to lead by our director 2 levels up. A rumor, which reached me third-hand, that I had made a comment about Patrick's work being substandard. I had never said that. I had given him feedback in a one-on-one that he had requested. What I didn't understand at the time was that these weren't isolated friction points. They were a paper trail being constructed. Each small complaint was a brick. By the time they went to HR, they had a wall. The formal report contained 6 allegations. 1, that I had repeatedly interrupted and spoken over team members in meetings, specifically targeting Donna and Sienna. 2, that I had sent an email to our director that characterized Patrick's project timeline as unworkable without consulting him first, which was framed as a betrayal of team trust. 3, that I had taken credit for collaborative work in my performance review without acknowledging contributions. 4, that I had made Sienna feel unwelcome and undermined during her onboarding period the previous year. 5, that I had created a clique with 2 other colleagues that excluded the 3 of them from informal communication. 6, that my overall conduct had made the team environment hostile and that multiple members felt they could not raise concerns without fear of professional retaliation from me. I read that list for the first time in the HR meeting room. And then I asked for a copy, which they were required to provide. And then I said, very calmly, I'd like to respond to each of these in writing within 5 business days. I'll need the dates and any documentation associated with each claim. The HR investigator looked slightly surprised. I think she expected tears, or denial, or both. She got neither. I went home that evening and I opened a document. I titled it, Response to HR Allegations, my name, date, and I started working through every single claim with whatever I could document. Our team meetings were held over video conference and had been recorded for the past 18 months, standard practice for our remote team members. I requested the meeting recordings from our IT department, citing the active HR investigation. They were required to provide them. I watched 11 months of team meetings. I timestamped every interruption in every meeting, mine and everyone else's. Donna interrupted other speakers an average of 3.4 times per meeting. Patrick, 2.1. I averaged 0.8. And in 6 of those instances, I was responding directly to someone who had addressed me. I compiled the timestamps into a table. 11 pages. The email in question was real. I had written to our director characterizing Patrick's proposed project timeline as ambitious given current resource constraints, not unworkable, as the complaint stated. The word unworkable appeared nowhere in my email. I still had the sent copy. I attached it. I also attached the director's reply, in which she thanked me for flagging the concern and asked me to set up a timeline review, which I had done, which Patrick had attended, which had resulted in a revised timeline that Patrick himself had presented to the team. At no point had Patrick raised any objection to the process. I had his calendar confirmation of the timeline review meeting. I attached that too. My performance review self-assessment was a document I had written and submitted through our HR platform. It was timestamped. Every project I cited, I cross-referenced with the project files, which showed my contribution level, tracked by our project management software as primary owner or lead contributor. For the 2 projects that were genuinely collaborative, I had written, and I quote from my own submission, led in partnership with the broader team. The complaint alleged I had erased contributions. My actual words were in the system. This one I was most careful with, because it was the most subjective. Sienna had claimed I made her feel unwelcome during her first months on the team. I couldn't disprove a feeling, but I could provide context. I pulled every Slack message, every email, and every calendar interaction between Sienna and me from her first 4 months. I had sent her a welcome message on her first day. I had offered to walk her through our internal systems. She had accepted, and we'd had a 2-hour call. I had copied her on relevant project threads proactively. I also found something I hadn't expected. A message from Sienna to me, sent in month 2 of her tenure. That read, and I will paraphrase to protect identifying details. Thank you for being so patient with my questions. You've been the most helpful person on the team. She had sent me that message 8 months before signing a complaint that said I had made her feel unwelcome. I included it, with a timestamp. These were the hardest to address formally because they were constructed from pure perception. But perception, when presented without a single concrete example, tends to collapse under the weight of everything else. I wrote 1 paragraph for each. I noted that no specific incidents, dates, or witnesses were cited. I noted that in 4 years I had received no prior formal or informal complaints. I included my last 3 performance reviews, all positive, 2 explicitly noting my collaborative communication style. And then I submitted the full document. 43 pages. Every allegation addressed. Every claim either directly refuted with documentation or contextualized with evidence that reframed the narrative entirely. The HR investigator called me the following Tuesday. She said, "We have some follow-up questions." Follow-up questions in an HR investigation can mean one of 2 things. They need more from you, or they've started finding things they didn't expect on the other side. It was the second one. The meeting recordings I had submitted had been reviewed. The interruption data had been verified independently. The email I'd sent the director had been pulled in full and compared against the version that had been described in the complaint. The discrepancy between ambitious given current resource constraints and unworkable was, apparently, noted. Sienna's message to me had been retrieved from the system and confirmed authentic. The HR investigator did not tell me any of this directly, but I have worked in professional environments long enough to read the temperature of a conversation. The temperature had changed. What I learned gradually through the process was that when the investigator had gone back to Donna, Patrick, and Sienna with specific follow-up questions tied to the documentation I'd submitted, the answers had not been consistent. Patrick's account of the director email situation differed from Donna's. Sienna, when shown her own message to me, had reportedly said she'd forgotten about that. Forgotten about a message she sent 8 months ago calling me the most helpful person on the team. 8 months before she signed a complaint saying I'd made her feel unwelcome. The investigation ran for 6 weeks total. At week 5, my manager, who had been largely absent from the process, called me into a private meeting and said, carefully, that she wanted me to know she had been fully cooperative with the investigation and had provided her own documentation of my performance and conduct. I thanked her. I asked if there was anything I should know. She said, "I think you're going to be fine." She was right. The investigation concluded on a Friday afternoon. HR's finding: the complaints were unsubstantiated. All 6 allegations were reviewed and none met the threshold for formal disciplinary action. The case was closed. I was informed of this in a 15-minute meeting with the HR investigator and my manager. The investigator said that the investigation had been thorough and that the evidence did not support the claims as filed. She said this without visible emotion, the way HR professionals are trained to, but she held eye contact with me for a moment at the end, and I understood that to mean what I believed it to mean. I said thank you. I went back to my desk. I deleted the working folder from my personal drive, the one with 43 pages of my own defense, and I got back to work.
Now,
the part you've been waiting for. What happened to Donna, Patrick, and Sienna. I will not overstate this, because the truth is satisfying enough without embellishment. Within 3 months of the investigation closing, Donna was placed on a formal performance improvement plan. I don't know the specifics. I was not privy to them, and I did not ask. What I know is that she was on one because she told a mutual colleague, who told me without being prompted. Patrick left the company voluntarily 4 months after the investigation. He posted about it on LinkedIn as a new chapter. His team sent him off with a cake. I smiled and attended for 11 minutes. Sienna stayed. We have never directly addressed what happened. We are professionally civil. She defers to me in meetings now in a way she never did before. Here is what I want you to take from this story, if you take nothing else. Documentation is not paranoia. It is protection. I did not keep records because I expected to be targeted. I kept records because I am someone who operates with precision in everything I do: my calendar, my emails, my project files, my communications. That precision was not a defensive strategy. It was just how I worked. But when I needed it, when 3 people constructed a coordinated lie and walked it into an HR office, my ordinary habits became my armor. They came prepared with feelings. I came prepared with timestamps. Feelings, without evidence, are just stories. Timestamps don't lie.